Namo Amida Butsu, Namo Amida Butsu, Namo Amida Butsu, Namanda Butsu, Namanda Butsu, Namanda Butsu, Namanda Butsu. Gasho. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namanda Butsu, Namanda Butsu, Namanda Butsu, Namanda Butsu. Hello and welcome to the Tri-State and Denver Buddhist Temples. This is the Shotsuki-Hoyo service for January and the Sunday service for January 30th, 2022. Very glad you could come and join us once again here on Tri-State Denver Buddhist Temple's YouTube channel. Service order for this Shotsuki service will be Sanbutsuge. You can find Sanbutsuge on page 53 in the blue Denver service book. After chanting Sanbutsuge, we're going to have a reading of the January Shotsuki names. Following the reading of the Shotsuki names, we will have a reading of the three treasures. You can find the three treasures on page 106 in the blue Denver service book. And if you have the time, stick around for our Dharma talk, this time on the subject of time and Buddhism. It should be a good one. If you don't have a copy of the blue Denver service book, well, don't you worry, because you can look in the description down below and find a hyperlink to a Google Drive where you can download your own PDF copy of the blue Denver service book. Feel free to download it, print it off, or send it to a friend. With the blue Denver service book, you can chant along with all the things that we do here on the Tri-State Denver Buddhist Temple's YouTube channel. Sure hope you give it a shot. And in exciting news, on February 25th, we'll be having a vaccine clinic here at the Tri-State Denver Buddhist Temple. This will be a clinic for anyone that needs their first shot, their second shot, or their booster shot, and anyone is eligible, so please come on down. And remember, you are always in Amida's light, so put your hands together in Gasho and say, Namo Amida Butsu. Kogen gigi hijin mugoku nyoze yenmyo muyo tosha nichigan mani shuko enyo kaishi nonpei yunyaku jumok nyorai yongen chose murin shongaku daion koru jipo kaimon shonjin sammai chie hitoku muyo shusho keiyu jintai zenen shonbun hokai gujin jin no kugo gaitai mumyo yokunu seson yomu nin no shishi jintoku muyo kukun konai chie jinmyo komyo iso shindo daisen ganga sabun zai sho ho ho kaido shonji mifu gena fuse joi kainin shojin nyoze samai chie hijo gose tokubu fugyo shingan isai kuku
一切大安決し不無百千億万無用大小諸行が王者供養一切死と処分不尿愚道検証不逆非尿五者処分世界不不可計無種仙道光明師匠変死小国尿税精進異人難容容が三分国土第一五種奇妙道場超絶国尿内安任務闘争ガト愛民道難一切実法大小信念症状意図が国経楽和難公務神妙善が心象本願の非力所所欲自法生存知恵無碍浄土子孫知が信用経路心死食読中願行精進年中不敬南無南無南無南無南無南無南無南無南無南無南無南無願にしく読平等性一切道本本内心お上安楽国南無阿弥陀仏南無阿弥陀仏南無阿弥陀仏南無阿弥陀仏南無阿弥陀仏南無阿弥陀仏南無阿弥陀仏。
This is our Shotsuki service for the month of January. Shotsuki is when we remember all those Tri-State and Denver Buddhist Temple members who have passed in the month of January. If one of your family members is on this list, please feel free to offer oshoko in your Homo Butsudan. If you have a family member who's passed in the month of January, this is also a good time to keep them in your mind. And please feel free to also offer oshoko in your Homo Butsudan on their behalf as well. However, this action does nothing for those that have passed. It is just a reminder for us of those who have come before us that are our teachers, and to say Namo Amida Butsu. So please join me in Gassho as I read the Shotsuki names for the month of January. Mitsuyo Sogi, Yukio Sogi, Steve Koga, Tomezo Nobuta, Katsu Nishi, Setsu Yanaru, Mary Miyazawa, Ferry Kuritani, Shiichi Fukuhara, Ayako Fukuhara, Ichimi Tsushima, Fumio Arakawa, Susan Kiyoko Tawada, Hatsumi Umemoto, Jo Tsuyoshi Sato, Violet Kagiyama, Bill Sato, Sada Sato, Andrew Horiuchi, Shogo Horiuchi, Takenobu Horiuchi, Mary Chikuma, Scott Lee Kim. Please put your hands together in Gassho. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namanda Butsu, Namanda Butsu, Namanda Butsu, Namanda Butsu, Namanda Butsu. Please join me in Gassho for a reading of The Three Treasures. The Three Treasures. Hard is to be born into human form. Now we are living it. Difficult is to hear the teachings of the Blessed One. Now we hear it. If we do not deliver ourselves in the present life, no hope is there that we shall be freed from suffering and sorrow in the ocean of birth and death. Let us reverently take refuge in the three treasures of the truth. I take refuge in the Buddha. May we all together absorb into ourselves the principle of the way to enlightenment and become aware of his supreme teaching. I take refuge in the Dharma. May we all together be submerged in the depth of his doctrine and gain wisdom as deep as the ocean. I take refuge in the Sangha. May we all together become units in true accord in the life of harmony and a spirit of universal brotherhood, freed from the bondage of selfishness. Even through ages of myriads of kalpas, hard is to hear such an excellent, profound, and wonderful doctrine. Now we are able to hear and receive it. Let us thoroughly understand the true meaning of Tathagata's teaching. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namanda Butsu, 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 Namanda Butsu. Hello and welcome once again to the Tri-State Denver Buddhist Temple. This is the Dharma talk for January 30th, 2022. I'm so glad you're here to join and hear and share the Buddha Dharma with me once again. It's so exciting to have you all here, and I'm excited for this talk today. In fact, I think we're just in time. Let's find out. If you all could join me in Gassho as we read from the Shozo Matsu Wasan, the hymns on the Dharma ages. This will be the 29th Wasan in the Collected Works of Shinran translation. So if you'd like to read along, it's on page 406 in the Collected Works of Shinran. Even the wise who lived during the semblance Dharma age put aside the various teachings of self-power and entered the gate of the Nembutsu, for it is the teaching in accord with the times and with beings. Namo Amida Butsu, 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 Namo Amida Butsu. I like this wasan for a lot of reasons. It gives the idea that even in a period when one was in the presence of Shakyamuni Buddha, the historical Buddha, the Nembutsu was still a path for them. Even the wise who lived during the semblance Dharma age. Those people who were capable, like kings and queens, people who were thought of as smart people, still said the Nembutsu, still looked to the other power, Nembutsu, of Namo Amida Butsu, the compassion of Amida Buddha. But this talk today, I want to focus on the last sentence. For it is the teaching in accord with the times and with beings. And in this case, Shinran's talking about the concept of Dharma ages, and specifically indicating that he believes, and a lot of Buddhist scholars, even to this day, believe, we're in a period called Mappo, the era of degenerate Dharma, the era where it is perfect timing for the Nembutsu, for the other power Nembutsu. But part of what I want to talk about also here is the concept of time, because time comes up in Buddhist literature, in Buddhist sutras, in Buddhist thought processes all the time. You may have heard the word kalpa. So kalpa comes up often. And kalpa was described to me by Reverend Thompson, one of the previous ministers here at Tri-State Denver Buddhist Temple, as the time it takes a heavenly being's arm, the sleeve from their arm, rotating over a mountain to wear that mountain down completely. Also known as a lot of time. I would say a grip ton of time. And this kalpas, these periods of time, are objective measurements. It's to give the idea is, wow, there's so much time that's happening between now and then. That's a kalpa. And so I was like, when I was reading that and thinking about it, what is time? So I went to the Oxford Dictionary because it's Oxford. And Oxford defines the word time as the indefinite continued progress of existence and events in the past, present, and future regarded as whole. So basically, the definition of time is one thing happened and then another thing happened, and we're delineating those two things from not being the same thing in the same time. So the linearness of our existence from here to there, straight line, the past, the present, and the future, all within one dimension, that is time. So when doing complicated physics and in other mathematical formulas, oftentimes we talk about four-dimensional mechanics. So a four-dimensional mechanic, there's a thing called the right-hand rule here. So we used to joke when I went to engineering school, we throw this up like a gang sign, the right-hand rule. And that's the x, y, and z coordinates. But the fourth coordinate is time, because as anything occurs, you can put a coordinate up on a three-dimensional graph, and that coordinate exists without motion, without anything else, because without time, we can't say that any motion happens. So velocity, acceleration, all these things are products of time. So if you look at the velocity of an object, it's considered vt. So there's a velocity in respect to time, the amount of motion we have in respect to time. Acceleration, the amount of motion we have in respect to time squared. Yeah, that's a lot, I know. But the point is, all of our understanding of the world revolves around time. And the interesting thing about time is not constant. And how we measure time has changed through time, through our existence. So the earliest clocks, the earliest reckoning of time was often the sun going over and the stars moving in the sky. And then there were things like sundials. If you're not familiar with sundials, they're definitely interesting. I know people still have them in their garden. And then there were mechanical clocks and water clocks and sand clocks. And then we get into how we monitor time today. And there's actually a lot of really interesting things. And so we're actually moderating and measuring time through interactions with our natural world. So I'm sure everyone has looked at their watch and been like, oh, it says it's a quartz clock. I wonder what that means. So a quartz clock is an interesting thing. A quartz crystal, or silicon dioxide, is a crystal that when a charge is applied to it, it resonates at a given frequency. And so when the right charge is applied to quartz crystals, it resonates at the frequency of 3,768 hertz. And for those of you who don't know what a hertz is in Hz, that is 1 period per second. So once again, we're defining frequency by our own time measurement. It's a little convoluted, right? In that we are using our measurements to define how this thing vibrates. But if you take a quartz crystal at 32,768 hertz and divide it by 2 15 times, so 2 to the 15th hertz, it actually divides down to 1 hertz. And so a quartz clock, when divided down 15 times, from 2 to the 15th hertz down to 1, will actually produce a perfect time of 1 second, the way that we have defined a second. And so if you look at a quartz clock, probably the one up on the wall is probably quartz, you put a battery in it or whatever, you'll notice that it doesn't sweep. A sweeping clock is not a quartz clock. A quartz clock does this, that clicking second thing. And that's because that is the vibration knocked down 15 times from a quartz crystal into the second hand of this clock. It's pretty interesting, right? And this will all make sense in a minute, so don't worry. So there's another type of clock, another way that we delineate and tell time. And for us in Colorado, this is actually pretty cool because it's here in Colorado, and that's called an atomic clock. So at NIST up in Boulder, there is a giant vacuum container with lasers pointing in it and a big chunk of cesium-133. So cesium is a stable yet radioactive element. It's actually used in a lot of medical procedures. But cesium, when a charge is applied to it, will change state at the frequency of 9.192 times 10 to the 9th hertz. So really fast. And we're able to measure the EM signal that comes off of cesium because it's very, very, very consistent. And by measuring that, we can divide it out knowing that this, if we can count that 9.19 times 10 to the 9th hertz and say that that's a second, we're able to create a clock that is extremely, extremely accurate. In fact, it's consistent to 1.1 times 10 to the negative 16th seconds, as in it won't lose a second for probably, I think it said 1 million years. So this is an extremely accurate clock. And then there's another type of clock, another way we try to quantify the world. Another way we try to define our linear motion through time. And it's called a pulsar clock. And pulsar clocks are really interesting too because they use neutrino stars. And so all the other things we've been talking about so far is worked within our system. So here on Earth with our gravity and our air and our velocity through the universe, going around the sun, our universe going this direction, our movement within the Milky Way, the Milky Way's movement within the greater galactic cluster, that galactic cluster's movement within the greater universe, so our speeds are fixed within our system. So our system of reference is fixed. But when we're using a pulsar clock, we're going outside of our system of reference. So a pulsar clock measures a neutrino star's emissions. So neutrino stars rotate really quickly, and they give off constant radiation, EM, electromagnetic bursts. Boom, 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 boom. And we're able to time those bursts because they happen very, 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 very consistently. So the neutron star, the pulsar JO 437-15, which has a period of 0.0057575 seconds, will actually be able to be used as a clock. Because we know that every 0.005757 seconds, this gives off a radiation burst. And so if we sit and measure that radiation burst, we're able to divide 1 by 0.0057575 seconds and say, once we measure that many, whatever the resulting factor of that is, once we measure that many pulsar bursts, we know it's 1 second. And this is actually accurate to 1.7 times 10 to the negative 17 seconds, so almost as accurate as an atomic clock from our perspective. So that comes to, Caitlin, why are you talking about clocks and pulsars and crystals and everything else? This is a Buddhist Dharma talk. And you are absolutely right. But I come back to what Shinran wrote in the Shozumatsu Wasan. Even the wise who lived during the semblance Dharma age put aside the various teachings of self-power and entered the gate of the Nembutsu, for it is the teaching in accord with the times and with beings. So we think of time, especially within the scientific world, as a constant. A second is a second is a second, even though it's actually, interestingly enough, we've redefined what a second is several times. And if you look at the history of NIST and some of the other standards organizations, what a second is and what an inch is and what a meter is, all these things have changed with time. But we think of it as a constant. So when we do math, that's a constant. But what we don't realize is time is relative to our position and our observation of time. So there's something called special relativity. It means the closer to the speed of light you are, the slower relative time is. So if I'm approaching the speed of light, in fact, I'm going to put up a formula up here. Delta t prime, so the way I perceive time, is equal to delta t, baseline time, divided by the square root of 1 minus my relative velocity, so v squared, divided by the speed of light, c squared. So the faster I go, the faster that v, that velocity component, the more different my delta time is, my delta time prime. So basically, time isn't constant, at least not for me, except we're all under the same causes and conditions right now. So all of us are here on Earth. I'm supposing, unless someone up on the ISS is watching this, in which case, please leave a comment because you're awesome. But if you're not on the ISS and you're watching this here on Earth, time is constant for all of us because we're within the same fixed system. So this has been addressed in literature a couple times. There's 2 books I'm thinking of. One was written in 1974. It's a sci-fi book. It won a bunch of awards. It's called The Forever War. It's not my favorite book, but it addresses this concept of time dilation and like what that looks like. The other one comes out really recently. It's called Project Hail Mary. I totally recommend it if you haven't read it. If not, there's a great Audible version of it. It was written by Andy Weir, the same guy that wrote The Martian, and time dilation is a large portion of what that book is too. But the point here is, especially like in Project Hail Mary, the astronaut goes off into space, and 3 or 4 years go by for the astronaut, and yet 20 years go by for everyone here on Earth. So this large period of time is different because the system in which this person saw themselves was different. And if this is hurting your brain, it probably should. And then you probably learned about something in school called the Doppler effect, which is an actual representation of something like this. Redshift, blue shift, when looking at space, redshift stars, blue shift stars, all that kind of stuff. But what I'm getting at here is this entire system of time, something that we take completely for granted, is of our own making and in our own system. It is ours. It is not the Buddha's. And that's important because when we look at the Buddhas, we don't think about them as bound things here, concepts that are here just to us within our own making, but rather outside of our understanding. And it is a wise person who understands their limitations in their relationship with the natural world and with the Dharma. And so Shinran writes this down, even the wise person who lived during the semblance Dharma age. So I think a lot of you guys are pretty dang smart. And you probably to this moment would have been like, time's a constant. A second's a second is a second. A minute is a minute is a minute. An hour is an hour is an hour. 24 hours defines the period in which the earth goes around. And yet, even those who lived in the wise semblance Dharma age put aside the various teachings of self-power. We aren't that smart. We're not dumb, but we aren't that smart. The more that we learn about time and things like special relativity, the more we realize we don't know. Up until a couple years ago, we thought that a universe couldn't exist without dark matter. And yet one was just found with no dark matter. We have no idea how it works, how that entire galaxy works. Like, we're confused. It doesn't make any sense. And the velocity and the speed and the time in which we're going is not always true everywhere. There's places you can go. If a planet is rotating differently, time will be different. For astronauts up on the ISS, they've experienced a different amount of time over the same period that we have had than they have had. Our systems aren't universal. That's why even Shinran's words are true today. For it is the teaching that is in accordance with the times and with beings. We are limited, and we are not that smart yet. And even when we will be that smart, we'll be smart enough to realize, we look in the mirror and realize, oh, I'm still the person of greed, anger, and ignorance. I'm still the bombu and foolish person. And the wise person, even the wise person who lived during the semblance Dharma age, the person who lived around Shakyamuni Buddha, around the pure teachings, is wise enough to look in the mirror and go, I'm not that smart. I'm not the one that can define all of this. I will put aside my merit-building activities and instead look at Amida Buddha and say, thank you, Namo Amida Butsu. I will transition myself from my self-power practice, my ability in trying to define the entire world, and my desire to hold on to those definitions, to hold on to the time, to hold on to my constants, and instead say, Namo Amida Butsu. That doesn't mean that we should stop trying to define time. We still live in our world, and we have to understand it and love it, and look how beautiful it is. And feel so lucky that we're born in a time. How lucky are we to be born now to hear Namo Amida Butsu? How lucky are we to say Namo Amida Butsu? How lucky are we to be embraced and never forgotten by the great compassion of Amida Buddha? And so, as Shinran said here, even those who lived during the semblance Dharma age, even those that lived during this, Mapo, the generate Dharma age, we should put aside the only thought, the singular thought that we are the wise person, accept ourselves as we truly are, Sono Mama, and say Namo Amida Butsu. While we gather and try to understand the world that we live in, we need to understand the mystery of it all. Nothing is fully defined. And the faster that we go, the more different things become. As we approach the speed of light, special relativity is going to get us all. So please join me in Gassho and think on the Nembutsu as I read once again from the Shozo Matsu Wasan, Hymns on the Dharma Ages, Wasan number 29. Even the wise who lived during the semblance Dharma age put aside the various teachings of self-power and entered the gate of the Nembutsu, for it is the teaching in accord with the times and with beings. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namanda Butsu, Namanda Butsu, Namanda Butsu, Namanda Butsu, Namo.